Metrics ruin absolutely everything.
That sounds a little dramatic.
And just to be clear, I'm actually in Montreal right now, and so I'm not actually talking about the metric system. What I'm actually talking about is metrics like numbers being used to measure and monitor things and being a way to evaluate and grade performance. And I am here in this video to tell you today that I am very worried about what they are doing to our society.
Stories told with Morgan Gold. With Morgan Gold, it's time for Stories Told.
You know, there's this story of back in India, back when it was under colonial British rule, the British governors noticed that there was a real problem with cobras. And so as a way to eradicate the cobras in India, they decided to start paying people for killing cobras.
Give this fool a lesson in economics.
And so for each cobra killed, a person would get a little bit of money. And a lot of the folks in India saw this and said, hey, this could be a good way to make money. And so people started cobra farms, and in these little farms, they would raise up cobras, and then they would kill the cobras, and then they get paid money for these cobras. Well, the British governor folks heard about this and they were absolutely irate.
You call this success? You let them have the fuel and bring me a bean?
Here they had set up this whole program to eradicate cobras, and the local folks were exploiting the program by raising these cobras, and they were cheating the crown out of its gold.
I wasn't aware that was something a person could do.
And so in their anger, they actually immediately canceled the cobra killing payment program, and all of these cobra farmers no longer had an incentive to raise cobras, and so they just released their cobras. And the cobra problem in India only got even worse, all because there was no longer an incentive to keep their cobras contained and no longer an incentive to kill those said cobras. Like I said, metrics can absolutely destroy a society. You know, obnoxious MBA business type folks are going to tell you that Peter Drucker once said, what you cannot measure, you cannot manage. But now mind you, the counter argument to that is Goodhart's law. And Goodhart's law states, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And lately, as I think about it, our society is very much reflecting Goodhart's law, and it's probably all Peter Drucker's fault. You know, as I was thinking about this the other day, there's so many examples where we are falling into this trap right now, where metrics are becoming the thing that we are trying to optimize towards in so many different fronts. Whether it be in education, whether it be with the environment, whether it be with the economy, whether it be social media, whether it be with politics, like all of these things I think are being ruined by metrics. And if we don't start getting more thoughtful about how we apply metrics and how we think about metrics and what we do with that information and how we act and behave, it's all going to get immeasurably worse. Like, for example, let's just start by talking about education, because I think this can be a really instructive example. You know, when it comes to the education of children, it's no secret that standardized testing has become a major focus for most schools. And that in and of itself has led to a greater focus on very specific things related to English and reading and mathematics, which are all important subjects, but it's come at the cost of less focus and prioritization on certain things like the arts and sciences and physical education and some of the learning subjects that are most inspirational for children and inspire some of the most interest in learning. So really, is it any wonder that we have such a moral panic going on right now about certain things like iPad kids and kids who have completely checked out from school and learning and kids who can struggle to barely even read, when it seems like so much of the performance of our schools is measured based on the performance of standardized testing versus actually saying, are these schools producing children who love to learn? And I know that's going to probably sound like a rather unfair statement, because how do you measure how good a school is based on how much the kids quote unquote love learning? Like, I will fully acknowledge that that is a hard thing to measure and a hard thing to quantify, and when you're trying to manage an education system at scale, it's pretty much downright impossible. But I raise all of these issues not to say that it's easy, but just to recognize that there's a challenge that exists within all of it. So how did we get to this place where metrics are ruining the world that we live in? Well, like most things, it all began in a very well-meaning place. You see, metrics actually make up nice proxies and essentially placeholders for the true goals and dreams and things that we want to accomplish. You know, students who get good test scores would indicate that you have students who have good teachers and are learning good things. If your video is getting a ton of clicks, that would suggest that it's a good video that people like and want to watch. If you're arresting more people, that might suggest that you're doing good work to fight crime. But much like the cobra farmers of India, that is not necessarily the case. Because as I said, those metrics are just simply proxies, placeholders, simulations for the thing you want to achieve. And so you could be making more arrests because you're putting a dent in crime, but you could also be making more arrests because you're arresting people for things that they shouldn't be arresting for. You can have your students getting good test scores on standardized tests because they're learning more, but you could also have students so focused narrowly on a specific test that they're not learning a whole heck of other things that they could be learning, and so you're having higher test scores but dumber students.
You're not stupid, Karen. I am actually. I'm failing almost everything.
And as I have personally learned over and over in my life, just because people are watching your video does not mean your video is good, nor does it mean that your video is doing a good thing. The real fundamental problem that exists when it comes to metrics is the fact that by focusing on those metrics, oftentimes you're focusing on short-term accomplishments and you get people narrowly performing to very specific goals, much to the detriment of the greater good. And so when I'm saying that metrics are ruining society, my friends, I do not feel like I'm being hyperbolic. I don't know. So the professor Zdeněk Tufekci, I apologize in advance for butchering the pronunciation, made this very interesting analogy around algorithms for platforms like Facebook or YouTube and comparing it to giving junk food to children at a cafeteria and how the metrics can really make things get a lot worse. The way they said it is, this is a bit like an autopilot cafeteria in a school that's figured out children have a sweet teeth and they also like fatty and salty foods. So you make a line offering such food, automatically loading the next plate as soon as the bag of chips or candy in front of the young person has been consumed. So basically, if you think like of an autoplay algorithm on YouTube, like once one video is done, it's gonna serve you the next video that has all of the same things that that previous video had. So the food gets higher and higher in sugar and fat and salt, natural human cravings, while the videos recommended and autoplayed by YouTube get more bizarre and more hateful. Because if you're just taking something like videos, for example, you do start to realize that the things that get the most attention, the things that get the most clicks, are then things that content creators are going to optimize towards. But those things are not necessarily good things, and the results and consequences of those things can actually turn out to be downright awful. But if either the platform like YouTube or the content creators are solely focused on optimizing towards those metrics, that's really where all the problems come from. And that's really where, when I say that this is ruining society, this is a perfect example of it. The folks who have their compensation driven by the metrics, they become hyper-focused on performing towards the metrics and optimizing to the metrics, and they often will lose sight of the big picture goal. And the cost of that ultimately ends up being the fact that there's going to be a negative consequence to the overall big picture of things, because the operators, the people actually doing the creating or building or managing, are optimizing towards the metrics, not optimizing towards the goals.
Or to be more blunt, the more you focus on getting more views, the worse your videos get.
You know, to take that cafeteria example that I just gave you a moment ago, you know, you're going to have a cafeteria where the kids are absolutely eating their lunches, and so if that's your sort of metric that you're shooting for, you're going to do as good as you can. But you're not necessarily going to have healthier students because they're eating good, healthy, balanced diets. And if you look at our society right now, that problem is rampant in virtually everything that we're seeing and in everything that we're doing. And that is why I do believe that the metrics are absolutely ruining our society. And we gotta come up with a better way to do it. So when I think about situations like cafeterias and junk food, I'm often struck by the fact that when we look at what's driving our discourse today, it's things that are performing to metrics that are often counter to our goals. Like when you think about the news media overall, when you think about whether it be a cable news network or a newspaper or a website, what they're basically measuring their success with is, it's ultimately going to come down to viewership, whether that's through ratings or clicks or even ad rates in their newspapers, which is not even really a thing in 2024. But regardless of the format and medium, what they're going to be doing is creating content that's generated in a way that's meant to get people clicking on it, meant to get people reading on it, meant to maybe get people paying for some sort of premium subscription. And oftentimes, the things that are going to generate the clicks and generate ratings are going to keep people watching and make those media properties perform best are going to be the fatty or sweet or salty junk foods that the cafeteria kids crave. And to make things even worse, when you look at social media platforms, what often performs best are the hot takes, the polarizing statements, the things that get people riled up. You know, there's a term that's often kicked around called engagement bait, and I think that is very, very much the truth in what you see shaping the political discourse. And if social media is becoming our primary form of political discourse, then I gotta tell you, it does create a situation where the incentives and things that people are trying to do and the topics that they're stoking and the things that people who are just simply viewing and reading this social media are seeing, it makes everything absolutely worse. Why is it that most people identify themselves as political moderates, but when you look at the voices that are often winning our primaries and entering into the general elections, so frequently those are some of the most extremist views that we're gonna see? And why does that phenomena seem like it's gotten so much worse over the past 30 years? It's because we're optimizing to the wrong metrics, my friends. We're optimizing to a situation where consensus and fairness and finding balance are not necessarily the virtues that are rewarded, and rather what we are finding is that things like a strong statement and getting folks riled up and really taking a hard side on an argument are the things that are going to get your attention, and those are the voices that rise to the top. You know, I feel extremely lucky because I live in a small town in the state of Vermont in the United States, and in Vermont we have this tradition known as Town Meeting Day, and basically the first Tuesday in March, the whole town gets together in a meeting room and we look at all of the major issues, and we as a town and community discuss and debate and vote on those issues. And while there are definitely some flaws in the system and it's kind of hard to manage when you have large cities or towns and there's people who have to work during the day, so their voices are not necessarily fairly represented, despite those imperfections, there are some incredible aspects of the Town Meeting Day tradition where I think it makes for a very, very different governing experience than what you're seeing in a lot of other parts of the world, and particularly in the United States. Because what you're gonna find is when you have to get into a room with a bunch of other people to help shape your government, you're gonna be much more likely to try to reach consensus. You're gonna be a whole heck of a lot more polite to one another so that you know that you can go see that person the next day and there isn't bad blood. And all in all, the whole experience is just a lot less polarizing. But the metrics that you're gonna see in a Vermont Town Meeting Day are gonna be very different than what you're going to see on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or X or whatever you're going to call it. Because let me just tell you right now, my friends, that crap does not fly when you're sitting inside the meeting house together. And now please hear me railing on metrics and understand that I'm not saying that we should abolish all metrics and that's not how we should think about things. Because in most things in life, I'm a big believer in the principle of balance and just how important all of that is. But I do think as a society, if we lessened our grip and we lightened up a bit how tightly we held to the principle of metrics and their importance, I think that that would be better for us. I think if we did find more balance to things, I think it would improve the situation we're all in. But I know that that's not going to be easy because that means seceding a certain level of control. Because the very nice thing about metrics is it gives you a sense of how you're doing. Like if you're out there trying to lose weight, for example, you can count calories and you can look at the numbers on the scale and you can focus on performing to keeping your calories under a certain number every given day. And you can use that as a way to say day by day, are you making progress and are you achieving your goals? And then you can look at those numbers on this scale and watch those go down lower and lower and lower and say, hey, I'm losing weight and that's a positive thing. And okay, so the daily metric is helping fuel the longer term metric and look how they're connected and isn't this great, I'm now achieving my goal. But if your goal is actually to be healthier, yes, losing weight could maybe potentially help you become healthier, but looking at your calories and looking at a number on a scale is not necessarily meaning that you're gonna be healthier. And so then you're faced with a very real dilemma of saying, how do you figure out how to manage progress? How do we know if our schools are doing well and if our tax dollars are going to help educate the generations of tomorrow? And how do we prevent a society being run by a generation of iPad kids and Sephora girls?
These 10-year-olds are crazy. Like, literally the most feral.
I want an Oompa Loompa now! Can it, you nit!
Focusing on standardized test scores is not necessarily the answer in how you address that. Similarly, when we think about our political discourse and discussion, we have to recognize that the overall objectives of a platform like YouTube or Facebook, their goal is to keep people using that platform and engaged so that that platform can then serve you more advertising so that they make more money. Like, just take a little bit of time and listen to an earnings call with Meta while they're talking to their investors about how the company's doing and what's the company doing to make more money.
There's been a bunch of speculation about engagement on our apps, and what we're seeing is more positive. The number of people using the service each day is the highest it's ever been, and engagement trends are strong.
It's nearly always focused on this idea of people using the site more and being more engaged in the site. And so then when you think about what they're trying to get people who are posting content to do, what they're trying to do is create more engagement. And then when you look at what people are doing in the seat of the content creator, they're going to be doing everything they possibly can to create more engagement. And arguably the easiest way to create more engagement is to just simply make people angry.
Calm down.
I'm calm!
I was actually sitting here and having my cup of coffee, and I made a list for you guys. So yes, with education, we're narrowing our curriculum, teaching to the test, and stifling creativity. When it comes to technology, we're spreading misinformation, having polarizing content, and creating a whole bunch of mental health issues. Metrics are crushing the healthcare system because it's compromising care quality, overlooking patient health, and really focusing on profit above all else. When businesses are overly reliant on metrics, they neglect the long-term strategy, they don't focus on innovation, or think about employee satisfaction or impact to the community. They are quite literally performing quarter to quarter. When it comes to law enforcement and policing, practices are not necessarily improving public safety, and they're oftentimes negatively impacting certain communities and community relations. When environmental problems try to get solved by focusing exclusively on metrics, you often find that there's ways of gaming the system when it comes to things like CO2 credits and carbon credits and offsetting. Academia has quite literally been destroyed by the metrics. When you think about things like the proliferation of low-quality research, the undervaluation of actual teaching, and a whole slew of professors performing in a way so that they can at least just find a certain measure of financial stability. And then even when I look at like businesses and people are doing things like, ending work from home, what you're going to find is oftentimes a culture of presenteeism and inefficiency and demoralized employees, all in the name of pursuing certain specific metrics that seem like they might be showing you that you have a healthy workplace culture. So what can we do? What is the solution? How do we prevent metrics from destroying us all and bringing an end to humanity and civilization as we know it? Well, quite honestly, I don't think the solution is very simple. And I think the answer is actually very, very complicated. I think first off, we as a society need to continue to prioritize balance, perhaps above all else. And yes, I'm fully aware of the irony in having unbalanced balance. But truly, anytime you ever optimize towards a specific single metric or goal, typically what you're gonna find is there's an inherent cost to each of those things. If you become too strong, you often become too slow, or your endurance or your flexibility is not that good. If you focus too much on your career, your social life and your personal relationships are going to suffer. If you pursue creativity and art at all costs, you're never, ever gonna be able to pay the bills. So just keep in mind, just because something is good and just because something is potentially a virtue, it does not necessarily mean it should become the main and only focus that you hold. I think the second thing that we can do is we need to recognize that we should always look underneath the numbers. A number in and of itself should not be the headline. You really need to give every number context and understanding and really put meaning to it, because that's going to help you better appreciate what's behind those numbers. And if you're just looking at test scores that go up or arrest numbers that go up, does that mean the schools are getting better? Or does that mean the streets are getting safer? You really do need to keep those things in mind. Instinctually, I want to come up with a third thing we could and should do, but I can't. I think if you just focus on being balanced and if you just focus on looking beyond the numbers, I don't believe it's going to solve all of our problems, but it could make them a little bit better. Now, I hope you guys have all enjoyed this robust discussion about metrics and why they are destroying society. Now, if you want to learn the secret to how to make people agree with you, you should probably watch that video. Thanks for watching, everybody.